tend to fall into one of a few categories. Usually they are trying to recapture your childhood in their Mega Man style games, trying to punish you and make you want to quit gaming forever in their tough as nail platformers, making you die, and die again in their many roguelikes, and so on and so forth. Sometimes you just gotta take notes from the tried and true classics, and no indie will tell you that Castlevania and Metroid are not tried and true. So many indie games fall into the Metroidvania category, and who can blame them? The satisfying design and appeal of a good Metroidvania is undeniable, so it is the perfect genre for small but juicy adventures for tiny teams to cut their teeth on, or make a living off of. One of these games is the bite-sized Momodora Reverie Under the Moonlight by Bomb Service, the fourth in the series. Despite being in a saturated market, the game does stand out visually, but can it do more than that? Or should you have stayed indoors tonight? To get this out of the way first, I can almost guarantee that this review will have more content to it than the actual story content in the game, though that isn't a terrible thing. What story it does have is fairly thin and mostly told in the game's manual, if you have the limited run physical release, or online on the website and such. Although the game is the fourth in the series, it is the first on a console, so thankfully the game is a prequel. Set 400 years before the events of the first game, you are placed in the role of the priestess Kaho, who has been sent from her village to purify and seal away a curse plaguing the land that is emanating from the eastern kingdom of Karst. Upon arriving, the kingdom and its subjects are all but dead, with only a few people surviving, and the place is teeming with monsters. That's basically it. As mentioned, you meet a handful of survivors, but they don't really amount to anything, and even the characters with scenes don't offer much. They seem to have gone for almost a Dark Souls style story, and if so, they really didn't know why it worked there as it doesn't here. There really isn't anything to go on, nothing to speculate, or nothing to think about, as no amount of info is really given to you. Despite that being a massive disappointment, the lack of story doesn't take away as much as you'd expect. As mentioned, Momodora is a Metroidvania style game where you explore an interconnected world and try to locate items and bosses as you progress further and deeper into the world. As you explore Karst, you'll run into monsters to fight, and thankfully, the combat here is simple but fun. Your abilities here are fairly simple. You have a simple 3-hit combo, a jump, a dodge, a range attack, and the ability to use an item. Taking a page out of Dark Souls' manual once again, your limited abilities lend themselves to a fun and active game flow as you are constantly attacking, jumping, and dodging about as you fight the many monsters around the city, collecting the currency that bursts from their defeated corpses, and hoping that a stray attack doesn't come your way. Like Dark Souls, you consume items to recover health or offer other kinds of buffs, and these items are found throughout the environment, adding to your refillable total. Also like Dark Souls, your dodge roll has iframes, making it incredibly helpful to fight the evil denizens of the city. Continuing with the Dark Souls comparison, enemies really hurt in Momodora. On top of that, there are spike traps scattered everywhere that are an instant kill as soon as you so much as graze them. These two factors combined can make it seem a little hairy, at least at the beginning of the game, and this is never as apparent as it is during the game's boss battles. There aren't a lot of them in the game, but the bosses that do drop in to mess up your day are fairly tough. I died quite a few times, but ended up discovering that with a little bit of knowledge of their attack patterns and some steady item usage, you can power through them without properly fighting the boss, making them a disappointing DPS race. This at least made Momodora's most frustrating part of the active portion of the game a little more bearable, recovering from a death. I know we were doing plenty of comparisons to Dark Souls here, but this is a little more annoying, honestly. Here it's fairly old school. You die, and you go back to your last save. That might seem typical and not worth mentioning, and you'd be right, but I feel it is worth mentioning thanks to the aforementioned instant death spikes. A lot of my deaths in the late game were because of a slightly short jump instead of falling to an actual enemy. It was really disheartening to die to an inanimate object so many times and lose progress due to not holding the jump button down for long enough. That being said, the actual gameplay portion of Momodora is fairly solid. It's fun, fast, and fluid, everything that you'd want from a Metroidvania game. Of course, this is a Metroidvania. For this design to work, you need to have a strong level design and a reason to explore and kill. It's not all just for the hell of it. Thankfully, Momodora does succeed in this area, for the most part. The interconnected map is home to plenty of monsters, as mentioned before, that contain their precious whatever it is they drop, which can be used to purchase items from this creepy imp-looking thing that can be found throughout the map. Other than that, items can also be found in the world, found inside treasure chests, or just lying on the ground in specific places. These items either come in the form of items used during gameplay, known as active items, or in passive equipment, known as passive items. And you can equip 3 active and 2 passive. The active items' abilities range from attacks to heals to buffs, and the passive items offer some passive special effects, such as enemies dropping more money when killed. Both are worth collecting and offer the bulk of the reason to explore the environment. Another reason to explore is to find the prayer bells scattered around the world. These serve as save points which restore the items you need in combat and heal your wounds. Later in the game, you also gain the ability to warp between them, making them useful for gathering items you missed. The other 2 reasons are for extra health, which you can find in various places similar to the items, and the actual goal of the game being the crest fragments. Crest fragments are found beyond not only a long stretch of land, but also a boss, and offer a new technique when found, such as the ability to dodge in the air. Now I know it's kinda cheap to say that the goal of the game is a reason to explore, that really is what there is to a Metroidvania. Sadly, there isn't much reason to return to old areas, as there are very few instances where you need an ability from later in the game to reach extra areas, but they do exist. Thankfully, this doesn't detract too much as you are constantly on the move and the map keeps you on track for places you haven't visited yet. This might not come as a surprise, especially since you've been, well, watching footage of the in-game over this review, but the game looks stellar. It's a visual style that's not quite as primitive or basic as the NES, but not quite as detailed or as sophisticated as the SNES. It's a joy to behold. Koa's animations look great, the effects of the leaves that appear from some of her abilities make her feel more in-depth than she seems, and the design of the monsters and environments all come together for a nice looking game. The effect of the water's surface really took me back the first time I saw it, and it still continued to impress me every time I saw it later in the game. There really isn't much to complain about visually, but there is something to complain about audibly, as the game doesn't sound the greatest. Now, I don't remember anything being bad per se, but that's because I don't remember any of it at all. The only memorable thing that came out of this sound-wise is the sound of some of the enemies and the sound of a certain cat that you see later in the game, both of these sounds being amusing rather than good. Thankfully, the unmemorable audio doesn't detract too heavily from how nice the game looks. As mentioned at the top of the video, the game is fairly bite-sized, lasting around 5 or so hours for your first run. Combine that with its simple gameplay loop and an unremarkable soundscape, and it might be easy to see this as an issue. Of course it can be, but it's also a satisfying 5 hours as the game doesn't overstay its welcome. The only issue that may be found in this is its price tag. It's still $22 Canadian in the eShop at the time I wrote this review, which may or may not be the deal breaker. Overall, Momodora Reverie Under the Moonlight is a short but sweet Metroidvania that doesn't impose upon you. Its beautiful visuals offset the poor audio, and its fast and fun combat combine well with the exploration to keep you invested. It may have some frustrating deaths that might set you back a bit, but there is enough here to want to see it through to the end. If you're a fan of Metroidvanias and want another one to blast through, this one's for you. It may not sound like much, but Momodora gets a 7 out of 10 from me. Also, did I mention that there's a boss that consists entirely of smacking a giant woman's tits around with a leaf? Probably should have mentioned that.